Valorant is Riot's tactical shooter and very often sits as the most watched game on Twitch, and it's easy to see why that might be. It's an incredibly well-designed game that's fairly easy to pick up, but still boasts an exceptional level of depth that keeps it fun for a very, very long time.
One enemy remaining.
Yes, give it ice! Yeah, baby, let's go!
Did you enjoy the show?
But Valorant was Riot's first big step away from League of Legends, and we didn't really know what to expect from Riot or their new game when it was first announced, especially when that game looked to be something quite unique as a hybrid of two very different subgenres of shooter, each with communities who seem to value very different things from each other. It seemed like a risky move to most, but it's a risk that has absolutely paid off for Riot. Now, there are a few reasons why I think Valorant has done as well as it has, but none more important than the absolutely rock-solid foundation that game is built upon. Riot says that they focused on two main aspects in the 6 years that they were developing Valorant, and those were to make the tactical shooter more accessible to new players and establish a large competitive scene. And everything about the game is geared towards realizing one of those two statements, whether it's the fairly modest system requirements that allow gamers really from all walks of life to give the game a try, to the observer tools that they've worked on to make the esports production easier to make, and probably more importantly, more fun to watch.
He's here, and do they turn? Do they look?
Oh my God!
3 players! Oh my word! It's Shane!
On the more hardcore side of things, Riot spent time ensuring that Valorant had many of the features and optimizations that professional gamers in competing tactical shooters had been asking for, in some cases for more than a decade. This led to things like the aggressive anti-cheat, the 128 tick rate servers as standard, some optimized netcode, better spray patterns, and some clever code around Pika's advantage as well. There's a bunch more here too. They even hired Volcano, an ex-professional Counter-Strike player, as a game designer to work on map design, and in the past he'd created some of the most popular competitive maps found in Counter-Strike, and they're still played today in tournaments around the world. His maps are still live today and are played in Counter-Strike. And Riot wasn't shy talking about this stuff either. Their initial announcement video and their follow-up videos on netcode and design principles made it very clear that they were gunning for that tactical shooter audience. It was a direct challenge to the competition and a clear promise to the community that Riot really wasn't pulling any punches with this game. They knew who it was for, and they knew exactly what was important to those gamers, and as far as anyone could tell, Riot was set to deliver on that promise. It's not really too surprising then that Valorant flooded Twitch with over 1.7 million people watching the game on its very first day in closed beta. These are some crazy numbers, but this popularity and hype couldn't have come from just their YouTube videos, interviews, and articles alone. There was something else at play here, and that was a devastatingly simple but incredibly effective marketing strategy that put the community at the heart of the game. To keep this relatively short, Riot had provided beta access to a fairly small number of professional streamers well known for their tactical shooter experience, and then locked access to the beta for everybody else behind Twitch drops, which you could only get by watching those professional streamers stream the game. In one fell swoop, Riot had turned every major streamer in this community into a living advertisement for Valorant. Streamers benefited from higher viewership numbers due to the hype surrounding the game at the time, but also these viewers got to hear from trusted community members just how good the game was. This didn't feel like a marketing ploy at all. It just felt like a bunch of people who really enjoy tactical shooters, in many cases are ex-professional tactical shooter players, getting to play a really good brand new tactical shooter. This infectious hype quickly spread to streamers outside of the tactical shooter community, and almost every major streamer ended up playing Valorant at some point. Many of my friends who really dislike the gameplay of Counter-Strike and other tactical shooters were watching Valorant streams all day, every day, just because the hype and conversation around it was so intoxicating. Needless to say, they eventually got into the beta, they played a few games, and they quit, never to come back. The game just wasn't for them. But that was okay, the marketing strategy had done its job. People were seeing Valorant everywhere on Twitch, whether they wanted to or not. With a strong game foundation in place and hype levels at their maximum throughout the beta, Valorant was perfectly positioned to become not only the #1 tactical shooter, but the #1 game on all of Twitch. And Riot attempted to keep that momentum going here by launching the game just 5 days after the closed beta finished, with some big changes to what was already there, as well as introducing a new character, a brand new map, and a brand new game mode to keep that excitement going. But it didn't quite work out like that. Viewership for Valorant dropped significantly and was hitting as low as 41,000 people just a few months after launch, which is still remarkably high and a huge success by any measure, but it was still a far cry from the peak of 1.7 million on the first day of beta, and still often well below its main competitor Counter-Strike in those same months. The general sentiment in the community was that Valorant did have potential, it was just held back by in-game bugs and issues with some really important things like bullets not registering on your target or problems with the in-game sound so people could just run up behind you and stab you in the back. You had an anti-cheat that was banning innocent players, or weapon balance was just kind of a bit all over the place. There was a ton of stuff that just needed to be fixed. Outside of that, there was also just general gameplay stuff like maps that clearly needed more work, modes like deathmatch just not being in the game, and in-game settings that you would expect to be there just not being there, like the crosshair customization, for example. There was a lot missing, and if you're thinking that Valorant needed more time between beta and launch, then you're likely not alone. A lot of people thought that at the time, including myself. But in hindsight, I actually think that Riot did the right thing releasing the game when they did, even if it was maybe a little bit early. And that's because Riot update their game on a 2-week patch cycle, which we just don't see from game studios anywhere. This is rapid, I mean it, this is incredibly fast. Most companies package their features up into 2 or 3 big releases a year, but Valorant was making smaller targeted changes to the game every 2 weeks, meaning that most of the problems I spoke about got solved quite quickly, and most importantly, before the first big Riot-sponsored esports tournament, First Strike, which started in October of 2020, although not without a few buggy updates here and there which had to be rolled back, like the patch 1.11 dolphin bug, which, whilst funny to look at, went live in the middle of qualifier rounds for the First Strike tournament I just mentioned, and was pretty badly timed. They rolled that back a day later, so they handled that pretty well, I think. In total, there were 14 patches in the first 6 months, with only one of those patches being considered minor. Now that's a lot, and it went a long way to solve many of the issues that the game had when it first launched, and the First Strike tournament was almost a showcase of the progress that the team had made on improving their game in that first 6 months. This tournament was shortly followed by the launch of Episode 2, which brought a really cool new trailer, a new agent, changes to the rank system, and some big balance changes to the game, and just a load of marketing material which got people excited for the game again. And it was around this time, the first day of Episode 2 in fact, that Valorant began its steady climb from a top 15 game on Twitch with its 41,000 viewers to the #1 game on Twitch that it is today, with viewers in the multiple hundreds of thousands. And if you're wondering, that patch cadence wasn't just a year one thing. 2021 had 23 patches in total, and 2022 so far has had 16. Although that's not actually true, it was 16 when I wrote the script, it's now on 17, and it's on track for around 22 patches by the end of the year, making just as many improvements to the game in the second and third year of its life as they did in the first year. The game is only getting better, and it really shows no sign of stopping. But that doesn't mean that Riot are getting it right first time every time. The Icebox map, for example, had 3 separate updates before it was considered balanced, and to be honest, it's still my least favourite map in the game. Gun and agent balance has been an ongoing debate and subject of many a patch since the game came out, and we're still missing highly requested features like replays, player commendations, LAN support, or map selection, just to name a few. But putting my personal preference for map selection aside for the moment, the fact that we've gotten this many updates on things that matter to the players in the first place demonstrates to us just how committed they are to getting this right, and they're committed to getting it right by working with the community, not just with themselves. Each change they make comes with articles explaining that change, why it was made, and in many cases what they're looking at next. This open and honest discourse with the Valorant community over the past 2 years has played a huge part in shaping the game into what it is today, which is an incredibly fun game to play that takes up most of my evenings.
One enemy remaining.
Get wrecked, boy!
A lot of studios could learn from what Valorant is doing with their communication and their patch cadence. And it is worth mentioning here, before I close out this video, that this sort of transparency that we've gotten from the Valorant team runs deep within Riot. It's not just Valorant that does this. League of Legends, Legends of Runeterra, and Teamfight Tactics all go to lengths far beyond what most companies do when it comes to explaining why they make the changes that they make to their games. And a special shout out to Moore on the TFT team here, as he often goes into these things during his stream as well, when he actually engages with the community live on why some of the changes were made, and I really appreciate that. Now, if Riot's track record with their other games is anything to go by, then I truly do believe Greg when he says that they'll be involving players early on in the development of the MMO. But that's it for this video. Some of you may be quick to point out that I haven't really spoken about some of the specific mistakes that Valorant has made over the years, but I purposefully didn't go into those because I don't think it's that productive talking about issues that have been and gone. I much prefer to recognize the efforts made by the team to resolve mistakes rather than just moan about issues. What I want you to take away from this video is that Riot had a very clear direction with Valorant, and when things weren't working out, either through game direction or bugs, they responded to it rapidly, which has over time created a very robust and fun to play product. There are still bugs, sure, but they typically don't hang around for long, and the team are dedicated to removing them whenever they come up. The future roadmap of the game looks great, and it's going to only get better, and I think if we see that with the MMO, then we're going to be in for a very good time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.